Hi, my name is Matt Gordon, and thank you for attending my session at PASS Virtual Summit 2020. Let's get into it. So, you can obviously read who I am, pronouns, job title, session title, all the things you're probably interested in. But what I want to call your attention to at the bottom of this screen is that we actually have Azure Cognitive Services working in this presentation. When you turn on subtitles in PowerPoint, you are leveraging some of the power that Azure Cognitive Services brings to you. So my hope for this session is, even if that's the only thing that you take away from this, that for data people, um, there are AI applications for us, or hopefully it sparks an interest, like getting into this 3 years ago did for me, that maybe you can apply this professionally as well. You've probably heard this a lot this week. Being a PASS Pro member does give you a lot of opportunities that the general membership does not. I'm a PASS Pro member, and I'd love to join you there and hope to see you at some of the networking events and things like that. I also run the Lexington, Kentucky PASS local group, and obviously I'm an advocate for those. Those are what make PASS Pass. So as wonderful as Summit is, even though we're not all together in person this year, PASS local groups are really what makes the organization tick. And so I definitely recommend, if this is your first PASS event, as Summit was for me 7 years ago, seek out a local group, start attending. Whether you speak, volunteer, just sit in the back like I did for years, it's all fine. The fact that you're here and involved is awesome. And as you can see, we also have SQL Saturday, PASS marathons, PASS virtual group. A lot of this stuff, almost all this stuff is online right now, but it's wonderful to be involved with. PASS has changed my life, and I'm happy you're here, and I'm happy we're going to get to spend the next hour talking about some cool AI stuff. Normally, this is the slide that would say, please silence your cell phones and all that, but I don't see anybody else here. So silence your cell phone or not, I don't care. I'll be hanging out in the chat as this session plays, and probably heckling myself a bit. You're wonderful to do that as well. But whether you want to heckle me or not, your feedback is very important to me. Uh, all of us that do this always want to be really, really good. Sometimes we are, sometimes we're not. But the most important thing is we want to be better the next time. And so if you think this was fantastic, please put that in the eval. I'll enjoy reading that. And please tweet that out to the world. You don't have to do that. But if you think this was awful, that's fine. You can go in the feedback form that's on your left-hand side and say, I thought Matt sucked. But please be constructive about it. If you thought it was really bad, that's totally fine. Not every session hits for everybody, but I want to know what you think I could do to improve for the next time. So this is a bit more about me. We're not here to learn about me, but I'll just mention a couple quick things. I've had a lot of positions in the data platform world. I got into AI stuff, cognitive services specifically, almost exactly 3 years ago to the day. It's really opened some interesting doors for me, both professionally and personally. So I hope that you see something in this session that sparks something for you. I think there's a lot of things, and I'll kind of detail them at the end, that I think for data people, there's some interesting applications here. If you just want to play with these, I hope you pull something out of this. You're like, oh, this is cool, and I would like to play with this too. If you don't like any of this and you think this is silly, but you do like to talk about race cars, as the second bullet there says, it's the only thing I like to talk about more than this stuff. So I'm fortunate enough to get to drive once in a while, as you see on the left-hand side there. My LinkedIn is SQL at Speed. My Twitter handle is SQL at Speed. My blog is SQLatspeed.com. My email is matt@SQLatspeed.com. So I do have a thing for speed. But we're not here to talk about speed. We're here to talk about Azure Cognitive Services. And my hope is there may be some experienced AI people here, and that's awesome. And I hope we get to talk back and forth in the chat during this session. I'd love to hear, even though this is an introductory session, some of what you think I should have put in here that maybe isn't here. But for the rest of us, this session is intended as kind of a crash course through Azure Cognitive Services, and really specifically the language API, because I feel like that's probably the simplest to get into. But if you understand the communication, the structures, and everything there, it's going to open the door to all the rest of what Cognitive Services offers you. And so we're going to start, and we're going to talk about what Azure Cognitive Services are or is if you're not familiar with these. And then we're going to spend the bulk of our time in the language API. That's where I got started, and that's what I've been able to do some work in. It's going to be pretty demo heavy. I'm going to try to cram a lot into the next hour or so. And like I said, I hope some of this sparks your interest. And if it does, you've seen on the last slide all the ways to reach out to me, and we'll cover those at the end as well. But if you just remember SQL at speed, you can probably find me online somewhere. After we've gone through the demos and what the language API is and talked about, how you can talk to these things and consume them and all that, we're going to wrap up and talk about what can companies do with this stuff. And by that, what I really mean is what can you do with it? And maybe it adds value to the company where you're at, and that's fantastic. Maybe it adds value to your resume, and you go find a company that allows you to play with this stuff, and this has really sparked your interest. That would be awesome. I've given variations on this session and in the past, and it's incredibly rewarding to get feedback where somebody's like, I saw your talk, I didn't know about any of this, I went and played with it, I built a thing that used it, and I was able to leverage that into a bonus or a raise or a new job or something. So, hopefully you find something here that's cool, just like I did a few years ago. So let's get right into it now, after all the introductory stuff is over. So what is Azure Cognitive Services? Seems simple, right? So what it is, it's a set of APIs. Microsoft calls it, and you're going to see in these early slides, there's a bit of marketing speak here because I think it's relevant. I hate marketing speak normally, but I think it's good here. So what is it? It's a set of APIs, and what Microsoft calls it is a set of machine learning algorithms to solve problems in the field of AI. What I call it is code you can call with code or bots of your own, or even no code. And we'll talk about that here in a bit, kind of what that means. So how do I use them? If you are an application developer and you're here at Summit just trying to get into the data space, and you're like, oh, an AI session sounds cool, kind of mixes it up a bit, this part's for you. You can consume it with a standard REST API call, and it's pretty straightforward. And actually, the last demo, we're going to go code heavy, and you're going to see how to call one of these. But what I want to do to work up to that, because I know there's people here who probably aren't experienced, maybe C# or Python devs, as I'm certainly not, is there are no code and low code ways to interact with these as well. So you see a couple listed on the bullet there: Logic Apps, Q&A Maker. We're going to go over a couple others as well. And then these, you're able to consume these wherever you're comfortable. Technically, you don't have to write tons and tons of code. You can if you want, and that's cool. I'm lazy. I don't want to do that. So when I first got into this stuff, I explored the no and low code ways. And so we're going to start with those. We're going to work our way up into C# type stuff. How do you learn to call them? So maybe you're like, well, I don't like the look of this guy. I don't really trust him. I'm going to bail on this session, but the stuff sure does sound cool. What can I do to learn more about this without listening to this guy drone on? You're in luck. So there's the Microsoft documentation on these is excellent, and there's a reason I include the link here. And the slides should be up, I believe, on the Summit site as well, so you will be able to grab those sometime this week or after the event. Not only is the documentation thorough, so if you want to go in depth on every single parameter and all that, it includes a bunch of examples. And the one awesome thing is it includes a bunch of quick starts as well. So Microsoft's not altruistic about this. They know if they make it easier for you to consume these APIs, that you're going to use more of them, and you're going to spend more money in Azure. And that's really what they want you to do, right? But it gives us a lot of opportunities to dive right into playing with some cool stuff. And actually, the demo you're going to see at the end was built very much on one of the C# quick starts for the translator API. So, like I said, plenty of examples here. I would say the examples lean more heavily on the code stuff, but there's also plenty of portals and kind of web examples as well. So if you don't want to write code or look at code, you have those options available to you. So what's the list? So the list, which is current as of recording shortly before the actual past virtual summit, is those 5 sub-bullets you see there. So there's vision, does what you would imagine. It analyzes images and videos. So you may have seen demos, though facial recognition. The service is definitely moving away from that for ethical reasons and things like that. There's also things like you can use a camera to identify, there would be cameras on a dam, and you would use, you would kind of train the algorithm to understand that this is what an image that's flooded looks like versus one that's not. Or you might see these examples. It's not facial recognition per se, but it will use sentiment analysis, which we'll cover from a language perspective earlier, and try to analyze the images of the crowd, see if the crowd are they angry, are they happy, are they enthusiastic, are they interested, those sorts of things. So vision's very cool. Not where we're going to spend a lot of our time here, but there are certainly sessions out in the broader community about this as well. Speech and language are very tightly related. My original plan for this session, when we had the hopes that Summit would be in person, was that I was going to be able to include a demo that would show you how the language and speech APIs work together. Unfortunately, in this kind of a medium and my obviously fairly modest recording equipment here, I'm not able to do that. What I will do is talk about some examples where you could do that, and hopefully that kind of sets you on the road for that if speech is what you're really interested in. But speech and language communicate very similarly. You'll hear me underscore that point several times here. And so I feel like spending our time in language, easier to convey in a medium like this, and also you can, a lot of the takeaways, especially towards the end, you can apply almost directly to speech. There's also decision and web search. In my brain, I kind of group those together. I realize that's probably unfair. So decision is basically like an enhanced search for research, papers, academic research, things like that. So potentially very interesting. And it does much more than that. I'm honestly underselling it there a bit. There's also web search, which, like I said, for me, these go hand in hand because I kind of think of this as like Super Bing, which I'm sure would horribly offend any Microsoft person that may or may not be attending this. But it's applying ML to web and Azure searches, and you're also able to plug it into some bots and things like that. So suite of 5 there, and it's 5 kind of umbrella APIs, and there's a lot of things you can call underneath there. As I mentioned, our focus here will be on the language API, but all of these APIs can be combined. I'll talk about some ways to do that specifically with language and speech because those kind of go hand in hand, written versus audio. And most communication starts out that way. Somebody types a thing to you or speaks to you or types a thing to your website or tries to talk to your app or something like that, and then you have to find a way to answer back. The main takeaway from this slide, other than the list, which I think is important, is that the majority of the way these talk to each other and talk to other things, beyond the obvious components of a web API call, is that the payloads that go back and forth are basically JSON under the covers. So largely human readable, if you'd like. Thankfully, makes it a little easier to demo and kind of understand how certain things work. And so you'll see that more towards the end, because like I said, I want to start us off easy, but towards the end, we'll see what that JSON document looks like coming back, and then how we can do some basic things with it. So what is the language API? So we kind of just briefly touched on it, right? So let's get more into it, because obviously that's where we're going to spend, our next several minutes here. So what does Microsoft say? I warned you about marketing speak. Here it is again, but I like what it says here, and that's why I've used it. So they say it increases your application's ability to read, comprehend, and enrich written text. And that it does exactly what it says. Now, obviously, that sounds vague, right? The reason it sounds vague is because when I started working on this stuff 3 years ago, the language API did far less than what it does now. And so they leave the marketing statements vague because they keep building on, even to the point where I had to change a couple of things in this session within a week or two of actually recording it now. Because there are things that are enhanced or things that completely change. So it makes it really fun to work on, but it also means the language describing it is both very descriptive and says exactly what it does, but leaves a lot to the imagination as well because they're filling in all those gaps. So what do I say it does? What I say is honestly probably more boring, but it helps us in our applications talk to users, talk to customers, and maybe potential users customers and anybody that might interact with anything that we've built. I don't want this to sound like it's marketing specific or you're trying to drive traffic to your website for people to purchase things, because that's not what Azure Cognitive Services and Microsoft AI is all about, but it's certainly an element of it. So is it just one API? It's not. You're going to hear me say API, APIs, methods. I'm going to use those interchangeably, and just it's code you can call to make it do cool stuff with AI. If you remember back to Christmas, I believe last year, there was the ad where the little girl, I believe, took a Surface tablet out to talk to reindeer and was able to talk back and forth with them. And Microsoft AI was kind of the logo and tagline after that. That was an allusion to the Cognitive Services Translator API. It does not translate into reindeer as far as I know, but you'll see if you hang around to the very end, there are a couple languages that you wouldn't expect in there that are not reindeer that it does actually translate into. But before we get to translator, we're gonna do some other stuff. And like I said, I try to kind of build this up in terms of what it does and also the technical intricacy of what it does and how you deal with it. So if you're like, oh, these first two things aren't deep enough yet, hang out with me, because I think it'll be deep enough by the end. I certainly hope so. So what we're going to start with, and you can see the list there. You don't need me to read it, but you'll see on some of the Microsoft kind of marketing around this, and also some community speakers and things like that that are talking about this. You'll see the hashtag like AI for good or something like that, and there may be a Microsoft hashtag mixed in there or not. So immersive reader is where we're going to start of this list. And the reason is that, so you just heard me say there's a lot of stuff about users, customers, apps, and all that. Immersive reader arguably could be that, but in my mind, it really isn't. Its purpose is educational. So if you're here at Past Summit and your field is education or adjacent to that, especially with either new speakers of English or people with learning challenges or things like that, I think you may find this part very interesting. So what can you do with it? And then we'll see a short demo afterwards. Again, this is marketing speak. I promise this is the last time you're going to hear this, but I like this phrase as well, so I wanted to borrow it and use it to kind of best explain it to you. So what Microsoft says Immersive Reader does is that it helps emerging readers, language learners, and people with learning differences absorb the written content on your site or in your application. This is more of an accessibility kind of thing. Now, you certainly could leverage it for sales purposes, and there's nothing wrong with having a product and selling it, wanting your website experience to be as accessible to everybody as it possibly can. But in my mind, there's an educational application here. So we see the quick list. It can change the viewable size of the text. So somebody with a vision challenge or something like that, it helps them. It can display tooltips of commonly used words. We're going to see that in the demo here in a minute. You can also come from a grammar perspective, not quite sentence diagramming, but highlighting nouns and verbs and things like that. So if you're a language learner, like the marketing-ish statement says, that may help you kind of figure out sentence structure and things like that. It can read the content out loud. It can display the syllables of words as well, if you're trying to learn how to sound things out. And under the covers, it can use the translator API to translate the content into another language as well. So I'm not going to show every component in this demo here, but we will see the translator API at the end. It just won't be in concert with Immersive Reader. So let's go and let's have a look at this right here. So as you can see, the text says they have a nice site here, and this should be on my resources slide. And basically, if you Google Azure Immersive Reader, you're going to come here, you click features up here, you're going to come to this site. Now they have kind of a pre-built like type a thing in here and take our tour. I typed something in here so we could take my tour. It's arguably less exciting than theirs, but here we are. So there's a play button down here because of the particular audio setup, and I'm not quite sure how you're watching this either. I don't want an audio demo because I'm not sure that everybody's going to be able to hear it as they'd like. But what I do want to show you is some of the things I just talked about. So let's say it had read here, and it says I'm using this demo website for my Past Summit demo. Who knows how long it would have taken me to come up with my own demo that would have been as good. So I can highlight this here. If I want to sound out a specific word, I can play that and you get to listen, just like a dictionary website online or something like that. So maybe that's not too exciting. But if I highlight tomato, I can listen to it, I get a picture. If I highlight banana, I can listen to it, I get a picture, which is cool. If I highlight diamond, I can listen to it, but I actually get two different pictures because, diamond you could say is like a geometric shape, and maybe you're trying to teach it from that perspective, or the gem as well. And so that's some basics there. You can see the grammar options, which kind of highlight what I talked about, and it's probably going to yell at me for my particular sentence structure and things like that. But you see we can select the colors here, and it highlights the nouns and verbs and things that I have over here. You can do adjectives and adverbs as well. And you can sound out syllables. So if you were hearing it read it, you would have that option here. Pretty easy to use, pretty straightforward, and they have great documentation on how to integrate this into a website or an app as well. So if you're in the educational field, my hope is that you just saw that and you're like, oh, this is really cool, and I want to play with it more. But we're going to move on from the immersive reader from there. So, like I said, that all of this could be used for AI for good. But for me, I would argue that that's maybe where the altruism to a certain extent stops, though any of this could be leveraged for that kind of thing. And you're going to hear me talk a lot from here on about interactions in like websites or apps or something like that. And that's just because that's the way my brain works. When I see these applied certain ways, it's like, well, this is a user interaction or this is a customer interaction or something like that. And, that's my reference point going forward. Doesn't mean you can't do wonderful things with this. Just means I may not be as nice a person as you are. So what can you do with this? So you may be like, what is Luis? I don't know what this is. Luis is because language understanding intelligence service does not exactly roll off the tongue. Odds are, if you've gone to a website and you see the insufferably perky person in the lower corner and they said, how may I help you? Or how are you this evening? What can I do to help? Or any of those sorts of things. That's a chatbot, which unfortunately we've only got about an hour here. Chatbots deserve their own session, and there are many community events that you can dive deeply into those, and there's awesome experts on those. Not here to talk about chatbots, except that chatbots typically lay over or can lay over a Luis model or a Q&A maker model, like we're going to see in the next segment. So what does Luis do? I'm underselling what it does, but I'm trying to distill this into like key bullets because, like I said, we're kind of on a journey here, and I want to show you as much as I possibly can in about an hour, and hope that some of it sparks you. So, Luis can determine the intent of the statement. Am I making a reservation at a restaurant? Am I trying to order a meal? Am I checking on a flight reservation? Whenever most of us get to fly again, am I checking on an order from a website, those sorts of things. It also attempts to then isolate the entities described in the statement. So it's like, oh, you're ordering something because my machine learning model tells me that that's what's happening here. Where are you ordering it from? What did you order? What are you checking on? Do you want to return it? Did it not come? Those sorts of things. So it'll do a combination of isolating the entities and the intents, and then trying to put those together and come up with very conversational answers back. As you heard me say earlier, a JSON object comes back from this stuff. It is typically used in chatbots. And what I think is cool about this is Microsoft provides us some pre-built models. So if you've ever been to a talk about like home automation or something like that, you're going to see, especially if it's a Microsoft person that has offered that talk, you're likely to see the home automation Luis pre-built model in action. They also do some things for restaurant reservations, some other kind of typical interactions as well. And we're going to see those here in a minute. It also allows you to create custom models. So if you're supporting a company or you're involved in an industry where maybe like just pre-built stuff doesn't work and you need something custom built for you, you can have that. And I'll show you an incredibly basic model that I wrote, but it does show off a couple of things that Luis can do. You can build an app using this stuff using only APIs. That's not something I'm going to show you. What I am going to show you is is the portal where you can build some basic stuff here. Another thing I want to highlight before I get to the demo, or as I kind of switch over here, what originally piqued my interest in Luis itself is my friend Sam Nazar from Ohio. So he's at SAMNASR. He speaks about a lot of other topics as well. But I saw Sam give a full session on Luis, which it definitely deserves, and go into great depth about everything it can do and all that. So if you're like, oh, this is cool, I really want an hour of that, seek out Sam online. Like I said, he's at SAMNASR on Twitter, and he has given that session at least a few times, and my hope is that it's been recorded sometime. But he knows this very, very well. So, like I said, it classifies intents and entities here. And I also mentioned the pre-built stuff. So let's work from the bottom up. So we've got pre-built domains. I've gone to the website, which is luis.ai in TV cooking show style. I have signed in early. And so if you come to this and you don't have an account for it, you're going to see a different view. And actually, if you scroll about halfway down, you're going to have the opportunity to play with some of this stuff. So if you're like, well, I don't want to go straight to this, I just want to like read the marketing stuff, just don't sign in and you'll be able to see all that. But I want to jump straight to this. So like I said, we've got some basic things. And a lot of this is, if you have a smartphone, which I suspect nearly everybody at this conference does, this is going to make sense to you. If you tell your virtual assistant, I want to make an appointment, I want to send a thing, I want to send an email, whatever, this is all going to be common to you. But what you see is the domain I added to my account is a restaurant reservation domain. And so let's dive into that and see what that means. So let's go into intents first. And intents are kind of exactly what they sound like. This customer made this statement and intends to do a thing. And so you'll see a list, and this is all, like I said, this is pre-built, but machine learning only enhances the knowledge of this. So let's click into change reservation. And so, we see kind of some analytics and just log responses that it has pulled in, or in this case, were inserted because it's pre-built. And it's isolating entities from these. So the intent is somebody said, we need to go later, like 6:45 change time. So that sounds like something they're speaking into a smartphone, right? Luis is like, well, I understand what this means. 6:45 is a time, and there's an interaction that I need to make based on this. And this one says we need to call Barclay Prime to see if they can push back my reservation 1 hour. So what it pulls out of that is, that's time, I know that. Barclay Prime is a place name, so I know that. And then I can construct a conversational response based on that. And there's all machine learning going on underneath this. Even the pre-built stuff gets a little smarter as you go. I have no technical reason to show this, but I get a kick out of this. As a Kentucky resident for the last 15 years, nobody calls KFC to switch a reservation time. It amuses me that this is one of the pre-built intents. But anyhow, on to entities from there. So what we've got here, you'll see some things that you would assume, but what I want to call your attention to is the types, because I think it's important to kind of briefly understand these. If you want to go take a deep dive into this, what are the two types? So we'll go into list first, because that's the simplest one. Meal type, you're like, well, what's a meal type list? It's probably the kinds of meals. So yeah, it is breakfast, dinner, lunch, supper, and you can add synonyms here as well. So if you're a restaurant, you're constructing a website, and a lot of people around you search for breakfast, you choose to call your offering brunch or something like that. You can make a synonym brunch here. So when somebody comes to your website, talks to the bot that you've laid over this model, and says, we'd like brunch at your restaurant at 11 a.m., the conversation that's going to come back to them is understanding that that's actually probably the breakfast type. So that's one thing. So let's look at the machine learned. So for me, this is more, so you could like upload a list or manually input a list. But what you've got here is where there's conversation that's come into it. You see the train model up here, and you can, based on input, which like I said is manual, or you've gathered from logging off your bot, you can train it on the additional inputs you've gotten. And what it does is it pulls out these types, as you expect. Sushi is arguably a cuisine type. Tacos, arguably the best cuisine type. But you can see where it breaks down these statements that it's getting and finds the intents, finds the entities, and then it will work in concert with a chatbot to provide that kind of conversational experience. And all the flexibility comes from the machine learning underneath this. And that's important to emphasize, because what I want to do is get into the next thing, and let's talk about what Q&A Maker is. So I've gotten some feedback on this talk over the years, as I've kind of grown in the different AI topics that I talk about. And when I built a session, which wasn't this one, and I talked about Luis and Q&A Maker in concert, a few people said, "Hey, you're doing that in the wrong order. Q&A Maker is more basic, and Luis is much more flexible because it has arguably more intelligence underneath it, and it does that conversational element in a much more comfortable way." And they're exactly right, but I don't think I do it in the wrong order. So what I want to do is show you kind of the awesome flexibility of what Luis can do, and we've just barely scratched the surface there. But you can see where it's ingesting things from a chatbot or something like that. You can then train that model, make it smarter and smarter. And we can also talk about some custom entities there as well. And in fact, why don't we hop back to that just for a second, because I feel like that sets this part up even better. So we've gone in here and we have so we'll go to all right, custom app. So I showed you the pre-built stuff, and let's go here just for a second. This is incredibly basic, but I want to show you what you can do if none of the pre-built stuff satisfies you at all. So I've built some intents, which is basically I'm going to agree with what the person said, and I manually input these examples right here. Did not ingest them, did not wire a bot to them, just basic stuff, just to show kind of what it can do if you don't use one of the pre-built ones. So I've said yes, go ahead, okay. I hit train, and it's going to use that intelligence and all the ML underneath to be like, well, I understand these. We're agreeing with stuff. So let's then go back to intents and let's see something else. So we've got greetings and salutations as well. So somebody greets it, and then you have the ability to tell it in whatever method you want. Start, please, begin, and then it kind of gets sillier and sillier from there. But you can see basically kind of the confidence scores on what that is. So what I was doing here is trying to build, and you see I didn't build any entities at all. And this has always made my family kind of mad because what this is it's actually for another project that I'm working on, and kind of showing the bare bones of how you might wire something up to order a donut through a chatbot. But my part of the project stops here. No donut gets ordered with what I've done. So my family gets pretty upset that I built a thing and spent some time on it, and they get no donuts when I actually test it. But what I found interesting about it was actually this. So we go to the order donut intent, and we see, let me have a donut. Can I, and, again, I put all these in, I train the model, and it gets kind of the scores you would think, like this is obviously somebody trying to order a donut somehow in a variety of different ways. But when I was building this, one of the things I found interesting was, see, I've got donut in here, but if you go back and look at my intents, like there's almost nothing here. There's nothing to really guide it, right? And so there's a lot of let me have, can I get, can I get, can I get. So what I figured was, what would be interesting to see, so you come to this test here, and I type a test utterance. So this is, of the barest of bones of bot interactions, but I'm going to test it with something to see if it's as smart as I think it is. So I'm going to say, let me have a pizza. So my kind of human understanding, like I see a lot of let me have, can I get, and I'm helpfully pointing at my screen, which you can't see, but you can see kind of down the left-hand side of those, let me have, can I get, to a human is like, well, let me have whatever. So if I just put anything after this, let me have a pizza, that's whatever, right? And it's going to say like, well, I have a high degree of confidence that even though the human called this intent order donut, this is just an order of some kind because it's got let me have in it. And so what happens when I hit that It understands that it's not it. And so I want to show that contrast. There's a reason I kind of backed up into this. I want to show that contrast here where Luis is intelligent because of all the machine learning stuff that underpins all of these trained models, whether they're pre-built or whether you built them and did a arguably pretty bad job like I did. It knows that, well, as a person who has a pizza, that's not what I'm interested in, just off some basic training here. What we're going to flip to from here is showing what Q&A Maker does. So we'll go back to this slide here and kind of hop back. And so what can you do with it? So it sounds a lot like Luis from this first bullet. I'm serving information interactively, right? Can I change my reservation? Can I order a donut? Sure, what flavor? Whatever. Q&A Maker, though, is driven off knowledge bases. So it gives you a conversational element, but it's really limited by the knowledge base that you've provided to it. And those can be pretty extensive and pretty intricate, but they don't have to be. And what my demo is going to show you is kind of a basic one that I think would make sense for a lot of folks and kind of what their use might be. Knowledge bases can be any number of things. We're going to go over the file types here on the next screen, but they can be FAQ pages, they can be uploaded files, they can be hand typed, whatever. You've heard me compare and contrast these here over the last few minutes. Is it similar to Luis? Sure, because you're talking to it, but it doesn't talk back as intelligently, and it's more of a fixed offering. And we're going to dive into the demo here to find out why. If you want Q&A Maker to be flexible, and what I'm demoing here is kind of intentionally not to show you what its limits are, but if you want that flexibility to come, it comes really from the information that you provide to it. The implementation's pretty static. So here's the demo slide, and let's dive into a demo of Q&A Maker. And I do want to highlight, I know I haven't mentioned it yet, but I am hanging out in the chat watching past Matt, eager to talk about this stuff and eager to get your feedback kind of live, but definitely do the session evaluations as well. So what we've got here, and again, TV baking show style, because we only have about an hour, I've provisioned not only a Q&A Maker service, but also a web app bot in Azure, so I can talk to my Q&A Maker service and kind of show you how this might work. And I won't go all the way into it, but if you come to channels over here, and we can do that. If you go to Get Bot Embed Codes, what that's going to show you is actually an iframe, and what that my gifts and talents do not lie in web design or graphic design by any stretch at all, but I do know what an iframe is, and I can probably put one in a basic website, and that's all it really takes to embed a bot like what we're going to talk to here into a site. So if you're sitting here and you're like, oh, well, this is pretty cool, and I can think of some uses for a website for whatever, my local church, my company, community organization, whatever it may be, but I don't know anything about web design at all. If you know what an iframe is and you've got a little bingle foo, you can figure out how to drop that code and get it right in the spot where you want. Then it's talking to all the stuff that's in the cloud. So what we've got, let's kind of set the stage here. Let's imagine that my wife wants to buy me a fabulous gift, and she thinks that I should go to somewhere in South Florida and spend the day driving exotic cars really fast. There are places that do that. No warranty express or implied on what I'm about to show you here. This was just a website that worked very well for this. So I don't know if this place is any good or not, but they do have some cool cars. So let's say she's gone to the site. She's like, oh, this looks cool. There's a lot of fast cars there. Matt likes fast cars. And there's a handy bot person down in the lower part of the screen. Let me kind of check into this and see if it's what I think Matt would want for this fabulous gift that I did not get. So what we've got is here. So let's say this. So let's say she's kind of impersonating me. She says, can I bring guests? And so you've typed to the bot here. It says, and the bot answers right back. Fantastic. Yes, guests are free to join. But let's say she said something slightly different. And so we talked about where Luis is, I would argue, much more powerful underneath and able to much more kind of carefully parse what the statements are. You're going to see the limitations of Q&A Maker here in a second. So if I'm talking to a human, and it's a human salesperson for this exotic car racing place, if I say, can I bring guests? Or if I say, can I bring other people? I'm probably going to get a very similar answer, right? Because they understand, like, oh, they're trying to bring some other people to come hang out. And so that first answer is that. Can I bring guests? Guests are free to join because guests appeared there. But if I ask, can I bring other people? And this is where, so the reason I went back and showed you kind of the custom Luis stuff, and that it wasn't just like word matching on stuff, is because and this is definitely not technically accurate, but in layman's terms, that's to me what's happening here is it's picked out the word other, and it sees, so can I bring guests, can I bring other people? To you and I, similar statement. To a Q&A maker service with a bot laid over the top, not the same statement. So when it says, can I bring other people, it says you drive with a professional race instructor in the passenger seat. No other passengers are allowed to ride with you. So, both arguably helpful, but that's where the limit of this is. So the knowledge base has to be very robust. And to that end, let's dive into the knowledge base and kind of what it looks like. So you'll see where I've provisioned this, and the website for all this is qandamaker.ai. And so you see questions and answers here. How old do I have to be to drive? Is there a limit on speed? And we see our offending statement, perhaps one of them here. Can I bring guests? And you see we've got question and answer pairs. We can add alternative phrasing. So if we get analytics off our bot, we could resolve the problem that I just showed you. That, oh, people are asking that when they really mean this. And so we can add an alternative phrasing that it understands to follow up with the answer over here. We can also add follow-up prompts if we want, like multi-turn conversations and things like that. But how did I build this? If you haven't fallen asleep yet, then you probably saw. But if you go all the way to the top of this, the source was an FAQ page found here. So this is Miami Exotic Auto Racing. They may be fantastic people. They may be shady. I have no idea. But it's a good demo for this service. And here we are. This is just a HTML page, and we've got questions and answers here. So how did I provision that? And then we're going to kind of wrap this up, and we'll go on to the next bit. So I went to qandamaker.ai. You see over here that I'm signed in. So I have an account. I'm going to quickly go through how you can build one of these, because I think for a lot of us in this is probably the most immediate relevant thing where you're like, I can take this from this session, I can go back to work, and I can do something that's going to make my life a little easier. And in the closing slides, we're going to talk about what that thing might be, because I can certainly think of a couple applications. So you come over here, you click this button, create a Q&A service in Azure. So you need an Azure account to play with it. There are free tiers for a lot of this stuff, and the pricing for playtime is very, very modest. So we've got our Q&A service that takes a few minutes. We've come down to step 2. We're connecting it to our knowledge base. And from there, we need some basic information about, what's our Azure directory ID, and you would go into the portal to look that up. Subscription name if you have more than one, service name, which would be the thing you just made, and the language. So you see we can get chit chat in all of these, and then just extraction in more. And I'll talk about this later, but the language support is always expanding. There's a reason I don't have a slide that says this service supports these 8 languages, because it might be 9 by the next time I give the talk. It might be 9 the next day. So, this covers the vast majority of folks, but not everybody. So yeah, I want to kind of highlight this here, and chit chat is what we're going to kind of focus on, because we're talking about that conversational aspect. We're dialoguing with our data, right? So we want to name our knowledge base next. You can just give it whatever name that is. As it says, it's really just for your reference. It's not like an external URL or anything like that. Then we're going to populate it. So you can populate it with, and we've got everything here. Tab separated values, PDF, doc, docx, XLSX, HTML, all those sorts of things. And they have to contain questions and answers in sequence. You can also manually type them in as well. I find that to be a bit of a pain, but you can. You can also enable multi-turn extraction here, which gives you more of a conversational experience, more along the lines of what Luis is without some of the intelligence underneath. But if you want to kind of guide people a certain way, especially for kind of a sales type reason, you can certainly do that here. And if you just want to drop a URL in, when I built mine originally, I used that here, and it just pulled it in. Took just a few seconds. You can also give your knowledge base and then the bot that's laid over the top a little bit of a personality, like it says here. So you can give it, like it says, the ability to answer thousands of small talk questions. If you want somebody to feel more comfortable, like maybe when you or your kids pick up your phone and say, "Hey Siri, tell me a joke," or something like that, you can wire up that ability here. Now I had mine set to none. You don't get to joke with that thing, but you can do some things here. And then what it does is it will add a bunch of questions and responses to your knowledge base. And so you'll see at the bottom of your knowledge base all kinds of stuff you didn't import because you added personality here. Then you click this button and you're done. So let's hop back to the slides and start to kind of take it home here. So let's dive into text analytics next. Text analytics is what got me into this stuff. And I know this isn't a session about me. You're not interested in hearing maybe how I got into it, but we'll take a 30-second detour. I had an old boss of mine who is familiar to people who've been going to Past Summit for a while. Brad Ball used to manage me at Pragmatic Works and has been at Microsoft for the last several years. He started playing around with cognitive services, text analytics, and specifically sentiment analysis about 3 years ago. Was trying to predict movie box office totals based on sentiment analysis on the hashtag of the official trailer, basically. So every movie seems to have an official hashtag. The trailer drops, the hashtag is known, and people start saying, "This looks amazing, this looks terrible," whatever. So he was trying to predict it that way when all this stuff was still in preview. It was public preview. You didn't have to be a Microsoft person or an MVP or anything to play with it. But I happened to be listening to a soccer podcast that mostly talked about the English top flight. And they were joking. There was a team that had won like the first 10 matches of the season. The podcast was mostly tongue in cheek. It was not a serious tactical breakdown of soccer. And they were joking that they were going to shut the podcast down after several years because this team had ruined the season. And the only thing that really mattered, nothing that happened on the field mattered, but if there was some way to capture and quantify the feelings of the fans, then they would continue the podcast just to talk about that. Knowing their tongue was planted firmly in cheek and on my way to a client to do very DBA stuff, no AI stuff at all. I was like, oh, well, I just read Brad's blog and he's doing some cool stuff with that. I think I can give them what they want. And I knew enough about the pod that they liked user content that was kind of off the wall and weird. So I built something that ranked the 20 English top flight teams based on the sentiment of tweets at their official club handle. So I'll kind of demo how that worked later. But my point for that kind of sidetrack is, and I'd like to think this kind of resonates with folks that are at this session, even if we're data people, even if we're like, well, I'm just a DBA or I'm just a dev or I just write reports or whatever brought you here. Keep your eyes open. There's cool stuff going on in the Azure world and the broader data platform world that can open a lot of doors for you. I've been able to travel to multiple countries to talk about that what we called mood table that I built. And it's opened a lot of doors for me to side projects and things like that. So if you're hearing something in this session, you're like, well, that doesn't fit my day job, and I love my day job. I don't want to do anything else, but maybe I want to build a session on something I think is cool that Matt didn't talk about. Or maybe I want to start a side project with a friend of mine who's also interested in this. I encourage you to do all of that. That's how I ended up talking to you now. So cool stuff here. Enough about me. Let's get back into what text analytics can actually do. So I'm going to hit some highlights here, and then we'll do a demo after this, and we'll close with translation. So text analytics encompasses a whole bunch of stuff. I have not captured everything here. You could do a complete session just on this, but I'll hit the highlights and probably some things that you're familiar with. So key phrase extraction. You may be like, well, that sounds kind of dry. I don't know what that means, or maybe I can kind of intuit what that means based on the wording. what key phrase extraction is like if you've gone to Yelp or any sort of review site, but let's stick with Yelp. And let's say you go to a restaurant and it has like the review highlights on their page, and it says like great sauce, well cooked pasta, great service, excellent wine list, whatever. That's key phrase extraction operating off the reviews that people have left. And so you've seen that probably at work in a lot of different sites, or if you're a Power BI person or Tableau or something like that, and you've seen a word cloud visualization where it's ingested a whole bunch of text, or it's gotten that word cloud content from somewhere, key phrase extraction is likely what's powering that as well. Text analytics can also do language detection, which is exactly what it sounds like. A language comes in from an API call, and it says this is English, this is German, this is Italian, whatever it may be. Named entity recognition, it's difficult to understand. So I'll try to describe this in what I think is the easiest way possible and a little better than the docs. But if it's clear as mud after I'm done, then I encourage you to go to the docs page and maybe their description resonates with you better than mine does. But what named entity recognition is what Microsoft says is it both identifies and disambiguates entities in text. So for instance, Venus is a planet, Venus was a goddess as well. And so there's the work going on in there, and then entity linking kind of works hand in hand with that to say, oh, well, you may want more information about this. So in this app or on this web page or whatever, I'm going to link you to a Wikipedia article or to some other site's article about what this is. And it kind of, in the layman's terms, it's using context clues to figure out which thing you're talking about, but there's very powerful ML operating under that. Sentiment analysis is that last bullet there in that top section, and that's going to take us to our demo here. I think this stuff is really interesting, so hang with me here. We're going to go through a lot here in the next few minutes, but I think this is really cool. So we'll get some of our chatbot and Q&A maker stuff closed out, and we're going to get into sentiment analysis. So you may think, well, Matt, you said we're going to do text analytics stuff. I wanted to see how to provision the text analytics API. Fair enough. That's super boring and does not make for a good demo at all. It's provisioning an Azure resource, but it does take a few minutes. If you want to dive deeply into that, you were hoping this was going to be a blood and guts breakdown of how to build a sentiment analysis thing completely from scratch. Go to my blog, sqlatspeed.com. Search for the phrase deep dive, and you're going to see in gory detail how I built the original mood table for the soccer podcast here. And that will go through in great detail everything I've done to kind of get us to this point. And this point, in my opinion, makes for a much better demo than provisioning everything and just kind of watching wheels spin. So I've already provisioned the text analytics API. That's down here in step 2. But what I've done is I've pulled up a logic app here. You may not be familiar with what logic apps are. So let me give you kind of a 60-second crash course here as to what they are. Logic apps are awesome. The best way I can think of to describe them is they're event-driven workflow containers. They're containers not in the Kubernetes or Docker sense, in the Tupperware sense. They hold a bunch of stuff. And they're event-driven. So something has to happen to trigger them, performing the rest of their workload. And for this one, you can see all of the workload here on this screen. So the way this one is set up is, like I said, I've already pre-provisioned the text analytics API, and we'll get to how we interact with that here in a second. But I need a trigger. And so a trigger drives off what in logic apps are called connectors. And you kind of see that link here. So I use the Twitter connector because, in my opinion, the best way to show sentiment analysis stuff is from Twitter, because you're guaranteed that it's 280 characters or less. Pretty easy text to kind of ingest and analyze the sentiment. You may be wondering, what is sentiment analysis? I don't know what that is. What it is basically the basic version, and the version that was available in version 2.0 of the API is it scores the sentiment of a statement from 1 being the most positive to 0 being the most negative. You'll never see 1.0. You'll never see 0.0. You will see 0.5 if it's an image or just something that just characters and it has no idea what it means. But most of the time, it's going to try to score whatever is sent in. Now, version 3.0 gives you, so 2.0 had the ability to analyze larger sections of text, but version 3.0 gives you the ability to actually break that down into sections and tell you the percentage that it thinks is moderate, neutral, positive, negative, those sorts of things. So if you're like, well, this is cool, but what I really want to analyze is like big chunks of text, large posts on social media or support forums or something like that. Version 3.0 of the API, which is the most current one, is where you want to be. So what I've done here is I created a logic app, and it drives off the trigger wired to the Twitter connector of when a new tweet is posted. The search text here is dog, and you see from the tooltip there, you can put things in quote if you want to search for multiple words. Use a hashtag. You can look for a particular username, love or hate. I use the the hashtag thing because when I created the mood table for English soccer, it did not have the ability actually to to look at either the @ sign or the hashtag character. So we had the raw text of the team's handle, and that was our search text. But here it's dog, and then it says how often do you want to check for items. Quick sidebar here. This seems straightforward, right? Every minute I want you to wake up and check to see if there are tweets about a dog, and then I want you to do the rest of the steps. But one thing I learned is, English soccer is pretty popular. Those clubs are massive clubs, and they have fans all over the world, and they have gambling websites and all sorts of bots and stuff that amplify everything they say or throw a bunch of garbage at that handle. And one thing I want you to know, because the docs still have not been changed, and this is a story too long for here, but I thought for 24 hours cost me almost $800. As it turned out, it didn't. Is you set a timer, and so I had set them for 15 minutes for soccer matches. It never stopped. So I got to the end of the day, my Azure bill was almost $800 just for, basically one match day of running this against tweets at soccer club handles. And what was explained to me in Azure's port was actually wonderful. It was before I was an MVP and all that, and they refunded my money. So very happy ending. Is what they explained to me was this, is that if the thing you're searching for is very generic, it will never stop. And so if the tweets never stop, then the counter never resets. So if you're searching, if you're like, I want to see if people are angry at Pepsi or Coke or McDonald's or something like that, please be cognizant of that. We don't have time here. I'm happy to handle this in the chat later in the live Q&A once I'm through here in a few minutes. There are things you can do. You can create a killer logic app to manage the scheduling of this now that Azure's scheduler is no more. So we could talk more about that, but I would encourage you, if you're just playing with this, I would almost manually start and stop these instead of trusting the timer, because it doesn't work quite the way you think. It does work the way I just said. So what we've got here is, let's say, so there's a tweet. We've enabled this. It says, there's a tweet about a dog. And we've got our step. Something happens. Our logic app, even though it runs serverless, is running on a server somewhere, and it's sent the text now to the text sentiment action, which I did here by just inserting a new step. And I have my text analytics API pre-provisioned already, so detect sentiment was available to me. And like I said, go to deep dive on search for deep dive on SQLatspeed.com, and you'll get all the steps that go into making this. So what do I want to sentiment analyze? I want to sentiment analyze the tweet text. But when I highlight this, you get dynamic content. So you may wonder, what is dynamic content? It's everything that comes out of this. So it's a massive amount of data, whether the connector is Twitter or LinkedIn or ServiceNow. The ability of logic apps to operate as kind of an enterprise service bus or something like that, pretty awesome. They connect to SAP, they connect to ServiceNow. You can do basic ETL with them, but this isn't a logic app session. I just think these are really cool. I pulled in the tweet text because I want to know, well, what's the feeling, this person tweeted about a dog. Was it positive or negative? And then what am I going to do with this data? So detect sentiment, all it does is generate a score. And so you can see the original version of this actually streamed to a Power BI streaming data set, which deserves a session all its own. I believe there have been ones at this event, probably earlier in the week before mine, talking about how cognitive services and Power BI play well. If you missed those, definitely go back and check out the session list, because I believe there were at least one or two, and that would kind of explain this step. But what I did is I threw it at a database. So you've got, I was connected to an Azure SQL database here. I specified a connector, obviously, and then here I get to specify the table name and what from the data set that comes from up here ends up in the database itself. And so things like username, tweet text, location, sentiment score. So you see icons different here because sentiment score came from here. So in the database itself, what does that look like? So apologies if you see some raw language here. This was actually raw feed off a side project I had with a friend of mine. And this was very raw from a match, from a team that was not doing particularly well that year. So if you see language that offends you, my apologies. I've tried to highlight the things we're looking at, so you don't see that. So here's one. This is a good one. So this was my first soccer pro game. I enjoyed it so much. So we go over to the sentiment score column. You see it there, 0.9899. So that's nice, right? Wonderful. And it obviously saw that was very enthusiastic, supportive type tweet. And so it scored it well. Let's find some bad ones. So what we've got here. So I picked this one because I think it's interesting. It's not somebody streaming curse words. It's not something obvious like I am so mad. It says it's frustrating to see so many calls missed on a particular player because he doesn't go down every time he's kicked. So it's not overtly negative. It's not, like I said, a bad word or just I am mad or whatever. But when we get to over here, get to our sentiment score, it knew the person was very frustrated, scored it very low, almost close to zero. So just about as negative as you can possibly get. So that's just a taste of what sentiment analysis can do. That was with tweets, but like I said, logic apps can connect to every social media platform, just about everything else. Logic apps, very cool. Sentiment analysis, very cool. But let's talk about translator text and let's wrap this up and bring it home because it's Friday. So what can I do with translator text? So you can shockingly translate text, mostly using neural machine translation. So that's NMT. If you go to the documentation page, you're going to see references to SMT, which is statistical machine translation. What that is, and I'm not smart enough, I was not a good enough computer science student to understand all of the ins and outs of this, but neural machine translation is basically using neural networks to do the translation. So it's more precise, it's faster, all those sorts of things. Statistical machine translation is not using that. It is fairly precise, it performs fairly well, but not as well as NMT. Microsoft's goal is to get every translation on NMT versus SMT. If you want to see how the current status of that, you can go to the Cognitive Services Translator API page, and there's a list there. It'll show you what's using NMT versus SMT. Translator can also transliterate text as well. So if you're going from, let's say, German to Hindi or something like that, it has the ability to transliterate that and show it in the proper alphabet. So not just kind of translate the statement, like it can actually, it does its level best to show it to that native speaker as accurately as it possibly can. And obviously a big part of that is having it in the correct alphabet or character set to do that. It can obviously detect language, it needs to do that to do what it does. It can look up word translations. It doesn't do speech. And so speech service, the speech API kind of handles that on its own. So what we're going to do is let's have a quick look at the translator app. And I think, very cool stuff. So here's a bunch of C#. You don't want to talk about that, right? So let's have a look at it in action. This is a basic console app, like I said, built off the C# quick start that was once upon a time on the translator API page. So type the phrase you'd like to translate. It is so much, never type in a demo, right? So much fun to speak at PASS Summit. Translate, it makes the call, and look what I've got here. it's detected my language was English. It's very confident of that. I have a translation to English because I want to show you something about how the JSON object comes back. There's no translation there. That's Italian. I don't speak Italian. I assume it's fairly accurate. Translate to German. I do speak some German. That's right. Remember long ago how I mentioned that there are languages, not reindeer, but that you might not expect in here. I am told this is Klingon. I'm not a Klingon speaker, so I don't know if this is actually true or not. But that is what it says. It says. I'm skeptical. I've seen some translations I think were it, but that's not it. So what we've got here is I kind of want to break down what the JSON is. So you see what comes back, and you see we've got a JSON array of translations, right? Well, let's hone in on kind of how that comes back. So I'm not going to go through every line of this because we don't have time, and you don't have the patience. And I probably don't either. So what I'm making an API call here. You see that. So we've got our route. We're specifying our languages that we want to translate to. We've specified the route, which comes from up here, the text to translate, which comes from the console, the subscription key and endpoints. The endpoint is basically the URL of the call that you're trying to make. And the subscription key is essentially your API key, your password to make that call. I've encased those in local environment variables because if I showed them in clear text, you'd have the ability to connect to my stuff and run up my bill, and that would not be cool. So I don't want to give you the ability to do that. And then what we've got is a method down here that basically is an async call and says, I'm going to send this out to you, send me the translations back. And so you see as we kind of page through these, it's building an HTTP call, it's building an API call, it's adding our route. It's saying, hey, I'm sending a JSON document to you. We talked about how these all talk that way. And so it's doing all that. And then it comes down here, and I've got a simple for each loop. You saw there's not much to this app. It's not pretty, but I've got a for each loop. And it takes the deserialized JSON array that comes back and outputs that. And if you understand that and understand that breakdown, if you don't, feel free to let's talk in the chat, then you understand the majority of the way the Cognitive Services APIs talk to each other and work and talk to other things as well. So let's wrap up. What can companies do with this stuff? We've touched on some of it. Immersive Reader is really cool, especially for educational type pursuits and things like that. Luis, we talked about conversational model, customer user interaction. They may or may not think they're talking to a real person. Pretty cool to be able to build that and have that interaction with your site better than it would otherwise be. Q&A Maker. This, I think, for data people that are in this session, this not necessarily the killer app, but I think this is really cool. If you work a support desk or if you're a DBA who's always answering the question like, what server has this database on, or what environment lives on this server, or what data center is this box in, you can build a Q&A maker, layer a web app bot over it, just like I showed you, and tell people that instead of bugging you on Teams or Skype or Slack or whatever, go talk to my bot. And it will tell you where this stuff lives so I can focus on my work. Text analytics, we talked about this. Companies that are monitoring support portals, message boards, social media, tweets at them, tweets about them, whatever, key phrase, interaction, sentiment analysis, things like that. Those can all work together to drive reactions to that. Logic apps, like we said, it's an event-driven, it's a workflow, so you can actually wire some really cool stuff in there where if the sentiment score is below a certain number, you can send an email, you can tell a marketing person or a customer support person, hey, please go talk to this username, they're upset with us, and we want to know why. Translator text, pretty obvious what it does, but I'll end with a very quick story here. So it makes software localization much easier. I know of a company that people I know work for that is trying to localize their software into Spanish. They're a fairly small family-owned place, and their solution to that was to send 3 customer support resources to Spanish lessons for 6 months, and then localize the software from there. No native speakers, and they're going to make mistakes. They may be funny, they may be offensive, who knows? If you used Cognitive Services for that, and I did offer them the ability to do that for free and was turned down, you're 95% of the way there on a localization effort. You're still going to want a native speaker to look at it, but it's done the heavy lifting for you. You don't have to send somebody to a class. You don't have to use Google Translate for nights on end to figure this out. You can send much larger text than what I did to Cognitive Services, and it's going to send it back. I hope you got something cool out of this. I love this stuff. I hope this came across. I'm very much a data person, but AI is a real passion of mine. This stuff's really cool. Cognitive Services is awesome. Thank you so much for being a part of Summit this year. Thanks for having me. As I noted, my resources slide is here. Let's talk in the chat. Let's talk in some of the chat rooms that are available via our portal here as well. You can find me online, SQL at Speed, on Twitter. Emails matt@sqlatspeed.com as well. Thank you so much for having me. Enjoy the rest of Summit. Bye for now.